And for this evening, I want to share with you the centrality of the gospel of the Bible, and especially of Jesus Christ. And the text that I've chosen for this evening is from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 4 to 26. The Gospel of John, chapter 4, from verses 4 to 26. And if you have your Bible, can I request you to remain silent? And if you have your Bible, kindly look at it and let us prayerfully consider and go to the text. And it is our prayer this evening that God would use His word to speak to each one of us this evening. So may I request you to remain silent as I begin reading His word. John chapter 4, verses 4 to 26. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself?" You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husbands and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am he." May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his holy word. Now, before I begin and dive into this very subject itself, I have titled this message for this evening as "The Gospel and its Power to Transform Lives." The Gospel and its power to transform lives. Now, before I begin, I want to read to you a letter which contains the exchange of two different people in real day and age. And this was a letter that was actually revealed by the authorities in Canada. And this was a conversation between two people, again, as I said. And this was recorded in the year 1995 in the month of October. And this is what transpired. And this is as it is. So now there were two different people. One were the Americans, the captain of this ship, and the other is the Canadian. And as both of these people began this conversation, the Americans begin by actually saying, and I quote, "Please divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid any accident. Please divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid accident." Now this conversation was over the radio. And so as the Americans had asked the Canadians, please divert 15 degrees to the north in order to avoid any accident. The Canadian authority, on the other hand, responded by actually saying, "We recommend you divert the course 15 degrees to the south to avoid accident." And by this time, the Americans were becoming a little bit anxious. The Americans responded once again, "This is the captain of a US Navy ship. I say again, you divert your course." The Canadian once again responded by saying, "No, no, no, no. We say again, you divert your course." By this time, there was anger in the air. And so the Americans once again responded by saying, "This is the aircraft carrier, USS Lincoln, the second largest ship in the United States Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north, that's 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this naval ship." By that time, the Canadian authorities once again responded by saying, "This is the lighthouse. This is the lighthouse. It is your call to divert." I'm sure all of you know what the lighthouse is. But who you think you are makes some importance, isn't it? We all think that we are someone in life. But who you think you are is important. But who you really are is even more important. I remember once I was traveling, and in one of the airports, I will not name which airport, I will not name which airlines, but there was suddenly a kind of an argument that ensued between two people. And this man was standing there and he was yelling. And he was continuously saying to the steward who was standing behind the platform, was saying, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who I am?" He must be some kind of an important official perhaps. And so he kept yelling at this lady. And he was saying, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am?" And for the first time in my life, I've never seen any incident like this. And I'm not telling you, I'm not kidding. And this lady immediately went to the microphone and said, "Well, I would like to make an announcement. I need your help, all passengers here. If some of you know who this gentleman is, please come and help him, because he does not seem to know who he is." Sometimes in our day-to-day life, you will find this kind of insinuation in our day-to-day life. People who go through not identity crisis, but who want to impress upon others. But today, when you look at this story, the story of the conversation between Jesus and this woman, a Samaritan woman, and it tells me from this very story, just as much as it was true for the US Navy captain, if they want to avoid an accident, they need to realize that they were talking to the lighthouse, to the people who were manning the lighthouse. And if they do not want an accident, they need to actually change, irrespective of who they think they are in life. And for this lady who was talking to Jesus, she had no clue who Jesus was. But if for this lady to really experience the real and the true gift that God has come to give us through the very person of Christ, she needs to do just like the US Navy captain. She needs to be willing to change the course in order for her to be able to see and to understand who Jesus really is. And that tells me about this very story. This is a story that has been reported and recorded in the Bible. It is one of the longest conversations that you will find in the Bible. And similarly in the Gospel of John, you will also find other stories that has conversation, such as the one that is in chapter 3 prior to chapter 4. And this is the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus. And this is a story where the name of the individual was also given. Why? Because Nicodemus is a famous personality. He was an influencer and he was a religious man, a very well-known personality. But on the other hand, this story in this very gospel, the name is not revealed. Who this woman was, who and what was her identity was not at all given to us. But we are given only this much, that she is an adulterous woman. She was a sinful woman. And so this is the very identity that was given. Now the Bible is so interesting in the sense that if you read between the lines and if you understand the context, you immediately begin to know that Jesus and God himself, as revealed in the Bible, was actually trying to communicate to us that here is someone who cares about you even if you are a nobody. Many of us, I understand here, we are not well-known people. We are not famous personality, but God cares about you and me. And that is the very essence of this very story. And the Bible records this, and it is the longest conversation that goes in great detail about what was transpired between Jesus and this woman. And that is something that is fascinating. Furthermore, if you understand the Gospel of John is written to introduce to us the adult Son of God. You see, unlike all the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you will not find any stories about Christmas or the infant baby. And here it begins with the introduction of the adult Son of God, and that is Jesus Christ. And the Bible tells us in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 31, what does it say? It says that this is written so that you and I may come to know this promised Savior, and that through their faith in him, they might have life and have eternal life. Now, in this very story, without going in great detail, I want to quickly bring out to us 3 important issues that comes out of this very story. Number 1 point, this very story tells us, first and foremost, that the gospel is for everyone. The gospel is for everyone, irrespective of our background, irrespective of our educational or reputation or whatever, but the gospel is for everyone. Here in verses 4 to 6, the Bible tells us of how and why is Jesus going to Samaria a big deal. Why is it so important that Jesus going to Samaria is being made such a big deal here? It is a big deal because of few important reasons. Number 1, politically, if you speak about that very region, you see Samaria and Israel, they are actually in the same region, that is in the Middle East. But although they are different in terms of geography, their culture is identical in so many ways, but then nevertheless, you will find that there are certain features that separates them apart, the Samaritan and the Israelites. That is politically speaking. But historically speaking, there were once upon a time one united nation, a nation of Israel. Later on, the nation of Israel was divided into northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was ruled by a very wicked king called Jeroboam. And the southern kingdom was ruled by Rehoboam. And who is Rehoboam? Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. During Solomon's time, it was a united kingdom of Israel. But during Rehoboam's time, this very united kingdom was divided into the northern and the southern kingdom. The southern was ruled by Rehoboam, the northern was ruled by Jeroboam, a very wicked king. Later on, Jeroboam went on to actually take them away, in the sense that the northern kingdom was actually, they had a very distinct belief system as well, and they also wanted to actually separate from Israel because they didn't want to have anything to do with the God that they actually once believed. And so now, after Jeroboam came another more wicked king, and his name is King Omri. And King Omri is the one who actually built a temple for the northern kingdom, a temple that was dedicated to Baal and to worshipping Baal. And not only that he built this temple, but he also actually named Samaria as the chosen capital for the northern kingdom. And theologically speaking, they have rejected the entire Old Testament. They don't believe anything in the Old Testament except the 5 books written by Moses. That was their belief system. And that too, they also believe the 5 books in their own version. That is their own interpreted version. They did not believe the way that we would believe in the 5 books. They have reinterpreted that. So now they have a very distinct religion, dedicated worship to Baal, and then they have this theology which is rooted in the 5 books only of Moses, and they have rejected everything else. Now that is the story about these people, the Samaria, the northern kingdom. And now, furthermore, they have also complicated by doing what? They have intermarried with pagan people, non-Jewish people, and they have also taken the gods also in the process. And in doing so, what have they done? They have actually brought a kind of a mixed bag, a bag which has really dissolved their identity. So they do not have a distinct identity anymore. Now they have become so adulterated in the sense that they have taken everything from every culture, and there is no unique thing anymore. And furthermore, during that time, they also have this practice of looking down upon a woman. And here at this very juncture, when Jesus comes to Samaria, and then he came to this town called Sychar, and he stopped at this very well. And look at the timing. This woman comes to draw water. She very much realizes that she is not wanted, she's being ostracized. And that is why the timing of her coming to draw water was very much in the noon time. And it is a very hot time of the day where nobody would choose to come and draw water. And yet this woman chose that time because she did not expect and she did not want to meet anyone. And yet Jesus, tired as he was, he went out of the way, went to this well, almost providentially in his sovereign grace, knowing that he's going to meet with this woman. But then as he met with this woman, a woman who was very much considered someone who is ostracized, there are 3 important things that really left this woman in a very disadvantaged situation. First, she is an adulterous woman, as the Bible tells us. Secondly, she was a Samaritan, where a Jew would not actually be meeting or supposed to be meeting. And then finally, that she is a woman. All of these 3 characteristics about this woman actually reduces her to a very disadvantageous situation. And yet, Jesus, as he meets her, began the conversation by just simply asking, "Give me water, give me water." And then the conversation would actually boils down to this one point where Jesus says about the living water. You see, when you study the Gospel of John, there are a few important things that you also need to keep in mind. There is always a dual meaning to everything that was being spoken. You remember in chapter 3 of the Gospel of John, what does it talk about? It talks about being born again, right? And 2 meanings again. Being born again in the spirit and being born again in the sense of talking about a biological birth. Here again, Jesus talks about thirst. A thirst which actually quenches your thirst in drinking water, and he also talks about spiritual water. And so here it is very interesting that Jesus uses this dual meaning. But please understand, Jesus, as he was talking to this woman, as Jesus was talking, he was actually revealing to her about her sins. But please understand that Jesus was not trying to actually expose her and put her in a very embarrassing situation. Jesus was indirectly also revealing the sins of the men who were associated with her as well. And so Jesus, as he came here, like a floodlight, was revealing the darkness, not only of this lady, but again of the entire town that she was in at that very point of time. And here you find the disciples comes and find Jesus talking to this woman. Now what do the disciples think? The disciples were actually beginning to think in their mind, what is Jesus doing, talking to a woman? And that also, she's a Samaritan. And so the disciples were ridden with this very idea that today when you look at identity, identity is driven by our gender, by our race, from where we have come, and all of these divisions. And Jesus, as he was coming, he was trying to bridge all of these divisions together. The question of race, the question of gender, the question of caste, the question of creed. And Jesus introduces himself and he says, I am that gift. I am that gift. What is so special about this gift? Friends, if you look and you survey all the other religions, I have spent so much of my time studying in a secular university, studying religion. And one of the important things that you will find is that in all the religions, if you were to summarize, for them, salvation is by means of work. If you follow these rules, then only you will actually have some hope. But Christianity and faith in Jesus is different from all the other religion, because salvation here is not on the basis of works, but it is on the basis of grace, and salvation is a gift from God. Not that you and I can do anything, but it is a gift from God. And here Jesus is offering you and me, and he's offering the people at that point of time. He's saying, I am the gift. I am that gift. And if you drink of this water, you will no longer thirst. But if you drink the water that you draw from this well, you will thirst again and again and again. But the water that I give, you will no longer thirst. That is what Jesus was offering. So the first important point I want to leave with you this evening is that the gospel is for everyone. Secondly, and importantly, the gospel frees people, or the gospel liberates people. In what way? If you look at verse 15 and 16 of this passage, you look at a very important aspect. Jesus was talking to her about water, and then he connected with thirst, and then he connected with husband, drawing the illustration, connecting everything, meaning that Jesus was talking to them not only about the thirst of physical water, but he's talking about the thirst that we all have in our life. You know, in our day-to-day life, my dear friends, young people, we all have our thirst. That's okay. We thirst for food, we thirst, sometimes we hunger for rest, we hunger for so many things in life. We want to be knowledgeable, we want to actually grow up being smart people, and so on and so forth. But there is a thirst in which we talk about that is rooted in our context of gender, in which all of this is being talked to about this woman. You know, this woman, as Jesus was talking, when this lady was saying, give me that water. I don't want to keep coming back here. I have so much of burden. I am in slavery. My town has ostracized and rejected me. And I'm all by myself. All these 5 men that I have lived actually have rejected me. Imagine for a moment. She was living a life of rejection. And I'm sure all of us who is seated here would have faced rejection in our life, one time or the other. And yet this woman, as she was talking to Jesus, she was so tired of all the things that she's experienced. And now she's looking and she's hearing a strange thing. And she's saying, give me this water so that I will not come again here. And Jesus, as if he was saying, really? You want this water? In fact, what you've been doing all this time, you've been digging wells to satisfy your own hearts, for your selfish desire. In what? In fame, in reputation, in all these men that you were looking who will actually come and fulfill your innermost longing. That is what you've been looking for. And here Jesus was saying to her that you have been digging on the wrong well. Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 15, the Bible tells us that, Jeremiah was preaching to this very nation, and he was saying that there are two sins that the children of Israel have committed. One is that they have forsaken the living water. Secondly, they have also built for themselves broken cisterns wherein they have sought to fill in water, where these cisterns, like pots, cannot even hold water. That is what Jeremiah was speaking to that very point of time. And now Jesus is coming here and he's saying, I am that living water. Furthermore, Jesus goes on and then he talks about the other important things where this woman was actually trying to build her identity on sexuality, so to say. Today we live in a day and age where we talk about LGBTQ. We talk about different genders. We talk about, being gay. And we talk about different other important identity that has been built on the very foundation of sex itself. And here, so to say, something similar where Jesus is saying, hey lady, where are you building your identity? What is it that you are deriving your identity from? Let me give you an example. We live in our country where now I see that, results are coming out, 12, 10. And the same thing as I was growing, I remember that, when you get your results, your parents will do what? Your uncles will come. I don't know here, but at least there, they will see if your marks in science is good, they will say, okay, you're taking science stream. And if your marks in science is not good, and it's arts as well, then they're saying, okay, you please go here. Right? And so that is the basis on which we were actually choosing all of this. And I remember at one point of time, it is just like that movie Three Idiots, and I'm sure all of you have seen that movie, right? They say, Janma se pura decide ho gaya kya banna hai jindagi mein. Right? Janma se. Right from the very time that you were born. And I remember when for the first time, me and my wife, we were blessed with our little boy. And as it would be in your family where you have little ones, your younger siblings, you can recall that time. What is that important thing that happens? Guests and family members, relatives would come to your home, right? They would bring gifts and, gifts for the baby and not for the parents, gift for the baby's clothes and so on and so forth. And one thing that I've noticed, we would go and say, where is the baby? And so the baby is lying on the bed, right? And so then we would show with so much of pride. I've never heard, whenever they speak, they look at the baby, and one common comment that you will find everyone who would make, they will say, look at the baby's nose. Looks like the mummy's nose. Look at the forehead of the baby. It resembles the forehead of the father. Yeah? But none of them have ever said that this baby, he is an engineer, or he is a doctor, or he is someone, professor or something. No. Please remember that our identity is rooted in relationship. Who are you? Today, we define our identity based on what we do, not who we are. Our identity ought to be defined by who we are, to whom we belong, rather than the other way around. It is not the other way around. You see, when people introduce, sometimes whenever I go and speak, they will say, oh, Dr. Balajied, they will say. Dr. Balajied, they will say. No, I'm not a doctor. I'm a human being. That is what I have been trained academically. But I am a human being. And so my second name, Nongrum, actually defines and tells me about my relationship with my father, Dr. Nongrum Senior. Right? And so our relationship is there. And yet again here we find a very typical example of today, where you find that this lady was defining her identity based on what? One function of their life. So one important issue when you talk about all these other variants or deviation in terms of sexuality, LGBTQ, they say that our identity is gay. But excuse me, your identity is not gay. That is just one aspect of who you are sexually. That is not your identity. You are a human being created in the very image of God. And it is this very image of God that the Son of God came and lived his life to demonstrate how a holy life ought to be lived. And he died for us as well. That is your true identity, not the other way around. And today we find ourselves having built this very understanding on a very wrong notion. And Jesus in verse 14, as he came and as he was talking, he says to this lady, and he says, I am the living water. And if you drink this water, spring of living water that will be eternal in nature will come from within your very life. Jesus, in essence, was trying to tell you one thing. He's saying, I am the one you need to be looking. You ought not to look and search for your satisfaction in life, for meaning and purpose in life. You ought not to look elsewhere. This is where you need to look. I am the one you need to be looking, because when you find me, you find everything else in life. That is what he was saying. He's saying, I am that water. I am that living water. And the Bible is filled, all the Gospels is filled with this. I am the bread of life. I am the light of this world. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the door. I am the way. I am the truth, and I am the life. I am that one that you ought to be looking. You know, when he made that I am statement, what was he doing? He was bridging three important aspects. When he said, I am, he was the bridge between humanity and divinity. When he said, I am, he was bridging between time that is finite and eternal and infinite in nature. And when he said, I am, he was bridging between heaven and earth. He was saying that I am the bridge between these two separate entities, heaven and earth, divinity and humanity, time which is finite and infinite. I am that bridge. It is when you embrace me, you get the benefit of all that God has promised for you and for me. That is what it basically says. Now, one more thing I want to say. You see, we talk about change. How can change come about? There are two kinds of changes that we look and we see all around. One is the mechanical change. I'm sure all of us here, when we've come to this place, it was the first time for me, and I saw this magnificent auditorium, the buildings here surrounding. This is a mechanical change that has been constructed, that is permanent and will not change. But the change that the Bible is talking about is not mechanical change. It is organic change, a change that you can see in plants, where you put on the seed and you water it, you manure it, and then you see the change that comes gradually. That is the very change that the Bible is talking about. And in this very story, we find that there is this change that gradually takes place. How can we see? You notice that this woman, in her conversation with Jesus, she begins to actually see that from the very idea of water, physical water, now she's connecting about spiritual water. She's understood that Jesus was not only talking about physical water, that Jesus was talking about something else, the spiritual water. It's something that Jesus was talking to him or to her about. Secondly, you also find that she began to actually say along the conversation that I noticed that you are a good teacher. I noticed that you are a prophet. You remember? He's saying, I noticed that you are a prophet. And then gradually she begins to see and to realize that from her understanding of being a prophet to now understanding that this very person is not a prophet, but he is a Messiah. Her growth in understanding, her change in understanding Jesus grew from physical water to spiritual water, from a prophet to Messiah. Her journey was actually showing that there is a change. That is what we can see. And here you begin to see that this woman was experiencing what? She was experiencing liberation, freedom. The gospel was freeing her. So the first and foremost, the gospel is for everyone. Secondly, and very quickly, the gospel frees and liberates you and me. Thirdly and finally, the gospel is the great reversal. You know, in the city when you travel, you will find that there are U-turns. The gospel is a great reversal that you have to take a U-turn altogether if you are to get on the journey. And here again in this conversation, we come to another stage where now the climax is being built again and again. And now this woman brings another subject to Jesus and says, now I understand. What does she understand? She says, oh, you Jews worship on this mountain, and I worship, and we Samaritans worship in this and that, and so on and so forth. And so she began to actually ask Jesus that it seems that worship is defined by geography. Isn't it true? Even in our land, we find that worship is being defined by geography, by location, and so on and so forth. These are the same things that also appeared at that very point of time. And men, you need to understand, cannot worship God based on their own understanding. Men ought to worship God based on God's revelation. You know, I remember once when I went to a different city, and we used to be part of this great, worshiping community, like something like this. And as we were talking, I remember one day there was this man who looked at another friend. We had 3 services, and the person who came out from the first service was saying, how was the service this morning? And he said, oh, well, the music was great. The music was great. And this gentleman, who was a senior man, we were talking, 3 of us, he looked at this young man and he said, young man, it is not the music or the service that was great. It is the God that we worship that is great. Every time you come, and when you are part of a music and a musical group, you need to remember that it is not the music that is great. Because when you go back and you think that today's worship is great because of the music or because of the message, then you are wrong. Worship is not defined by the greatness in the music. Worship ought to be defined by the revelation that comes to us. Worship ought to be informed by revelation, not by all the experiences that we go through. And yet at this very point of time, this woman, again as Jesus was talking, and Jesus began to say that I tell you the truth. You say that we worship here, we worship there, but let me tell you, God is seeking men and women who will worship God in spirit and in truth. Not in geography, not in location, but God is looking for men and women who will worship God in spirit and in truth. And that is what Jesus was actually meaning. An hour will come. Why does he talk of the hour? Because Jesus at that very point of time was talking to this woman about the hour, meaning that he speaks about 3 important significance of the cross, that he is going to actually die. 3 important things. He's saying the hour. And in Greek, when you study that, the hour actually means the transaction that Jesus actually goes through to do it on your behalf and my behalf. 3 important things that the cross reveals. Number 1, the cross reveals the absoluteness of God's love. You see, friends, there are few important things in life. The greatest desire that you and I have is the desire for love. A desire to belong. And the greatest fear that we all have is the fear of rejection. Nobody likes to be rejected. And yet, God, looking at us, unworthy as we are, sinful as we are, God looks at you and me, and he expresses and reveals to us the absoluteness of his love, the unconditioned love that he has demonstrated on the cross for your sake and my sake. It is unconditional, and that is absolute. Secondly, the cross also reveals to us the satisfaction of justice. Today someone was asking me, why is it that it is important that Jesus had to die? It is important because the law of God, God being holy, looked at mankind. He has the law. We have violated the law. And now to bring us back, what does he do? Somebody pays on your behalf and my behalf, based on this very law. And so that what he has accomplished on the cross, the justice of God is met in the very person of Christ himself. And that is the justice that the cross brings to you and me. Thirdly and finally, the impartation of righteousness. The impartation of righteousness. You see, you and I, by nature, we are sinful. I was saying to someone this afternoon that we are not sinners because we commit sinful acts. We are sinners. We commit these sins because we are sinful in our very nature. None of us can come to God and actually say that we are righteous. None of us. All your righteousness, all your good works, as Jeremiah would say, are nothing but filthy rags before God. And here, the Bible tells us that what Jesus accomplished on the cross, He imparted to you and me righteousness. So that when you and I come to the cross, when we come to the throne of God, we do not come on the basis of our own righteousness, but we come on the basis of the righteousness that Jesus has got on your behalf and my behalf. So when God looks at you and me, He does no longer looks at us as sinful people. He looks at us as righteous, based on the cross of Jesus Christ. The cross of Christ ensures and guarantees us the absolute nature of God's love. Secondly, the justice required by God is met in the very person of Christ on the cross. And then He gives you and me righteousness. Now, I'll be coming to an end very soon. But let me tell you one story. Many years ago, I was speaking in Cochin. And as I was speaking with someone who's very famous. And as I was speaking there, one of the questioner from this packed audience, where I think at that very point of time, even some very famous personalities were also there in the audience. And someone asked this question and said that, why is it that in order for us, to become good, to do good, why is it that we need to actually accept Christ? Why is it that it is not enough to be good, and why do I have to actually become a Christian? The question was raised. And this was raised by a very famous personality that I will not mention. But this person was saying, we are good. We try to do the best that we can. But why do you Christians insist that you need to become a Christian in order to really be good, to be accepted by God? Why isn't that my goodness not good enough? And then the response that my senior colleague gave at that very point of time taught me so many things. And he said this from Psalm 24 verse 3 and 4. He says, who can ascend the hill of the Lord? Who can stand in His holy sanctuary? He who has clean hands and a pure heart. Who can ascend into the hill of the Lord? Who can stand in His holy place? Only he who has clean hands and a pure heart can stand. Question. Who has clean hands and who has a pure heart? None of us has. None of us has. Now please understand this very carefully as I bring this to a close. If you really want to worship God, you need to have few important things. Redemption needs to come prior to righteousness. Righteousness needs to come prior to worship. If you and I ought to participate in true worship, then only righteous people need to participate in worship. If you are not righteous, you are not worshiping. How can you be righteous? You need to be redeemed. Redemption comes prior to righteousness, and righteousness comes prior to you and I participating in worship. That is what Jesus meant when He said, a day will come when God will actually look for men and women who will worship Him in truth and in spirit. The question is, have you been redeemed? Are you righteous? Because if you are not righteous, you are not worshiping. Let me bring this to a close. 3 important applications that we can take away from this. What does this story teach us? Number 1, this story teaches us that just like that story of the U.S. naval ship captain, in order for them to be safe, to avoid accident, they need to be willing to change the course. And this woman at the well, in her conversation with Jesus, was willing to change the course of her life. Question is, are you willing to change the course of your life? You need to ask this question. If you are not yet a follower of Christ, the question to you and to me is this: will we continue to cling to our self-centered agenda, or will we be willing to change the course of our life and to accept Jesus as the gift that is given to us by God? Number 2, the Samaritan woman's understanding of Jesus Christ continued to grow from physical water to spiritual water, from Jesus recognizing, as she recognized Jesus to be a prophet, to him being that Messiah, that gift of God. She continued to grow in her experience and in her life. Today, you and I, as followers of Christ, I want to place before you this question. Is your spirituality moving in that direction? Are you growing? Is your understanding of God growing? Or is it the same as yesterday and day before yesterday? Is it growing? Is your knowledge of God's word growing as time passes by? This is the question that you need to ask yourself this evening. Finally, if you are already a follower of Christ, the Bible tells us that this woman was willing to go out and to reach out to all the people in her village and to bring all of them to Jesus Christ. If you are a follower of Christ, if I am a follower of Christ, we need to answer this question. Are you willing to break barriers? Are you willing to actually move and sacrifice, go and bring people at the feet of Christ? Are you willing to do that if you are a follower of Christ? And I believe that this lesson today has these important issues for us to deal with. And I hope that all of us this evening, as we go out from this hall, we will think seriously about these questions. That are you willing to change the course of your life? Let us look to God in prayer.